welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Sam Glazer-Hewson here with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. And I'm so excited to welcome you to today's webinar. This one's part of the Future in Focus series, and it's called Two Careers, One Household, Research on Dual Career Couples in the Economy. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. This session is being recorded today and will be shared with everyone who has registered, also uploaded to our Goldmind website as well as YouTube for continued access. You'll also receive a follow-up email that includes our program evaluation, ways to keep being involved, and even an opportunity to be in part of ongoing research. So be sure to stay tuned to your inbox after today's webinar. Lastly, as questions arise during today's expert talk, please submit your questions to the Zoom Q&A feature. I will be moderating them as they come in to be asked during the Q&A portion of our session today. Now, I'm so excited to get to introduce our speakers today. First up, I'll introduce Colleen Flaherty Manchester, PhD. Colleen is a professor in the Work and Organizations Department and holds the Bill and Sue Hodder Board of Advisors Professorship at Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. She also has a PhD in economics from Stanford University, as well as a BA in public policy and economics, also from Stanford. Her research primarily investigates how workplace practices of employers, such as design of retirement, savings plans, monetary incentives, and human capital management, intersect with the careers of employees. Much of her research draws on theories within economics, as well as disciplines outside of economics, including the disciplines of management and sociology. Her research has been published in leading labor economics, management, and industrial relations journals. And she's also the faculty director of the Center for Human Resources and Labor Studies at Minnesota Carlson. Our second speaker is Myles Shaver, who serves as the Associate Dean of Faculty and Research at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management, where he's also a professor of strategic management and entrepreneurship and holds the Curtis L. Carlson Chair in Corporate Strategy. Myles' research about corporate expansion is published in leading scholarly journals, and he's invited to present regularly at conferences and universities around the world. His research about Minneapolis-St. Paul's headquarters economy has helped guide talent attraction and retention initiatives in the region, and it's presented in his book, Headquarters Economy, Managers, Mobility, and Migration. Myles presents this research to audiences in Minnesota and to audiences in other states and countries. He's the recipient of the Irwin Outstanding Educator Award, which is the most prestigious international teaching award in strategic management, as well as the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business Distinguished PhD Alumni Award. We love to see that. Poets and Quants profiles Myles in their compilation of the world's 50 best business school professors. Myles is also a fellow and the president-elect of the Strategic Management Society. Now, I'm personally so excited to learn more about this topic, and I hope you'll help welcome both of these speakers. Over to you, Colleen and Myles.
Great. Well, thank you. So I will start to share my screen here. And I hope that's come through. Good. Well, thank you everyone who's joining us today or joining online. It's a chance for Colleen and I to share our research on dual careers, and especially we'll have some focus on the economy of the Twin Cities. So, as was shared a little bit, we want to deal with this question. How do dual career households contribute to the economic vitality of our region? And like I say, it's a general question, but one will very much focus with respect to Minneapolis-St. Paul. So a little bit of background. Where does this come from? Um, Sam alluded to my book with respect to headquarters economy. And the notion of that book was to explain why do we have such a concentration of big corporate headquarters here in the Twin Cities? And as a little bit of background, if you've always had the impression that there's lots of corporate headquarters here, the digging in and the data say that you're right, but you're probably even undercalibrated. But then the question is, what really drives it? And that's what the book dives into. And one of the key things I look at is that it's really a story about talent. Because if you think about headquarters, the unique thing is not the fancy skyscraper or the corporate campus. It's really a story about human capital or talent. And one of the key elements of talent in corporate headquarters is professional management. And the book documents that in the region, there's a couple interesting things about this types of professional talent and how it moves across companies. So many of us in the region have this experience. We've worked with people, or you've had your own experience of working in many companies across regions. That doesn't happen everywhere. And and I can document that that leads to sharing of practices and is a great thing for our economy overall. At the same time, one of the reasons that happens is there's this interesting movement of especially high earning, high educated individuals into our region, is that they tend to come here. And it's often hard to get them to Minnesota, but once they're here, they don't ever want to leave. And that really fuels that. And so that's basically the background of the book. But in doing the research and looking through this, one of the interesting things was the data that I collected was from a survey of over 3,000 headquarters professionals. So it was really to help me document what's happening. And one of the interesting insights that I didn't really know going in is at that time and with that survey, almost 70% of couples report being in a dual career household. And just a little bit of sense of what that meant, it was something a little bit more stringent than just saying that their spouse worked. The survey was worded such that you're in a dual career if your spouse has career responsibilities and aspirations. So you can see that it's a little bit of a heavier lift. So the book was published in 2018. The survey was 10 years ago. Last year, in partnership with the Minnesota Business Partnership, we addressed this question. Gee, has anything really changed? Of course, we've gone through a pandemic. Remote work is something that we have now. In the Twin Cities, we've had periods of social unrest, especially with the murder of George Floyd. We're moving through a different generation in the workforce. And so we went out to replicate the survey. And I want to share one of the real interesting insights from the current survey. And so this is about a little over 1,000 headquarters professionals, again, in the Twin Cities. And it's no longer 70%, it's 80% of the couples report being in a dual career household. So this notion that dual careers are really important for our region and the talent base bears out in the numbers. But you might ask the question, well, what does that look like across the United States? And so here I'm showing you data of 30 major metros across the United States. And depending on the size of your screen, that might be hard to see. But these data show that our region, Minneapolis-St. Paul, has the highest proportion of dual careers when we focus on married couples who both have a college degree. Boston's next, followed by DC. It goes all the way down to Vegas and Riverside, California, where it's true about a third of the people who respond, or a third of these households have dual careers, but that's a lot less than what we see here. So one of the key or interesting things of our region, too, is this, not just that we have them, but dual careers seem to be something that we disproportionately have versus the rest of the country. Now, what does that mean for talent attraction and retention? As I mentioned, that's a really key element of our economy. So, the existing academic literature really tends to highlight the constraints imposed by dual careers. And they use the term the two-body problem. And for those of you who've been in dual career situations, right, that really means that if you're going to be in a place with your spouse or with your partner and you both want to work, you both have to find jobs. So it's no longer just one person having to find jobs, it's two people having to find jobs. And they talk about the difficulty, and many of us have faced that and the constraints that that imposes. But there is a mirror image of that. And so that means that regions where dual careers are actually maybe easier to have or more prevalent, or the notion of the job market really facilitates that, they're going to be extremely opportunistic for both partners or spouses. And in many ways, that's going to be a key factor in retaining talent, making it, less easy or a bigger constraint to move, but a bigger incentive to stay in the region where there are these opportunities. And so again, I'm going to turn to the data that we had with respect to this in the survey. And so one of the things we did was ask people or gave them a number of hypothetical job opportunities. And one was their willingness to consider transferring outside of the Twin Cities. If you take a look across both years, those in dual careers are less likely to consider being transferred. Now, one careers seem to have dropped a little bit, but still there's this difference between dual careers and one career, something that appears to be attributing to the notion that we have such talent retention in the Twin Cities. The other thing too that's important is those in dual careers, they seem to have stronger interest. They're not just more less willing to leave, more interest in opportunities that keep them here. So they're willing to consider a job in a different industry, or as long as they get to stay in the same location, or they'll be happy to take a remote job that's sort of based elsewhere as long as it keeps them here. And that's really a key element. The other thing we also see too is for those who are in dual careers, it's more likely that their past position was in a different industry. And again, this moving across industries was one of the key things that distinguishes our region. One of the elements might be it helps, the dual careers because they want to stay here. They're more willing to do that, or they may be more likely to take a risk to do that. It's something I want to talk a little bit more about. One of the other things that Colleen and I have found in our research is that dual careers can actually fuel the startup ecosystem. And so here's the way I want you to think about it. And something that, I found or was documented in talking about our regional economy is that there'd be a number of professionals that worked in our big headquarters that would be willing to step down into startup or entrepreneurial companies and really help them grow. And when I'd ask people, why would you leave a headquarters job to go to something more risky? Oftentimes an answer was, oh, I'm at the time of my career. I'm willing to do this, something a little bit different. But I have a spouse who has a full-time job in one of these headquartered companies, and we can afford to take the risk. And so one of the things we wanted to explore is does dual careers, in addition to keeping people in the region, does it actually help facilitate this startup ecosystem by making people or giving them the confidence to take a riskier choice like moving to a startup? So overall, if we asked people, would you move to a startup? About a third say that they would. But let me break this down now by dual career, and I want to add one little nuance. And so we're going to take a look at what does this look like for people in a one career household, and then in dual career households, there can be variation. Sometimes careers are prioritized equally. Other times careers are prioritized to, focus on one spouse or one partner or the other. And if you think about the situation where you have a household with one career and a household with two careers where we really focus on one person, those probably don't differ that much. So we wanted to take a look and we at the data to see this, does being in dual careers make a difference? And especially having some insight into the relative prioritization of the different spouses. And so if you take a look at that, we really see no difference between a one career household and a household that focuses on one of the careers, especially if that's the one that's prioritized. As they become more equal or the other career spouse's career is prioritized, they're more willing to take this chance to move out to a startup venture. And once again, it's an interesting element of dual careers that they potentially have this other spillover benefit to our economy by allowing people to potentially take on a more risky type of employment because they have this, in essence, insurance or diversification effect of being in a dual career household. And so let me hand it over to Colleen right now.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. So I think that really sets the stage of kind of why these types of households matter and why they could be potentially advantageous for an area or region of in terms of that job mobility and willingness to take risks. I'm going to now dig a little bit deeper into that current survey that Myles was mentioning and really investigate kind of under the hood in terms of, who comprises these dual career individuals and how are they similar and how are they different from maybe those in one career households. So we go to the next slide. One of the things, given these are career-oriented individuals, we wanted to look at job level, right? So where are these individuals in their organizations? And I think what I found really interesting is that dual careers are really represented across the organizational hierarchy. Yes, they may be like a little bit lower representation in our senior leadership positions, but they're still there and quite sizably so. In this graph, you can see that in terms of the blue, that's our dual career individuals. They are more heavily represented in that individual contributor role or in a managerial role. And basically, they're uniform across that and that senior leadership role. We do see that the one career household individual has that higher representation in the senior leader role. I think, how we define senior leader in this survey was whether they're kind of managing other managers. And so in complementary data that I have collected in some other research, we also find that there's really strong representation throughout the organizational hierarchy, except with the exception of the very, very top. We do see a slight, actually a pretty large decline in the proportion dual career, but it's at a very, very high echelon of the organization. One of the things I'll get into a little bit further here is this idea of, like as Myles said, 10 years have passed, we have even greater representation of dual careers in this economy. Is that something that's just happening over time, or is there some type of cohort story? So we'll get into that and help us understand a little bit more into this hierarchy picture. All right, so yeah, this is what I was thinking about in terms of the cohort. So we do find that there are proportionally more dual career who are among the younger ages. So when I say younger, I mean, less than 45 years old. We have greater representation of the dual career households. So on the flip of that, we have greater representation of one career among individuals who are 45 plus, right? So question in my mind is, how much is that kind of playing into this difference in job level? It turns out it explains only a small, explains some, but not all of that gaps, right? So if we found that dual careers, let's say that representation gap between senior leaders and management's about 25 percentage points, only about 5 percentage points of that is related to differences in age. So there does seem to be, kind of at least some difference in the organizational hierarchy related to the dual career. At the same time, these individuals are very career-oriented and on par in a lot of ways with our one-career households. So a question that often comes up when we talk about dual career and how individuals in two-career households can be successful, there's often an implicit assumption, but these individuals, they must have some other connection to Minnesota. Maybe they're raised here, maybe they have family here. That kind of makes it all possible because it is a challenge. And turns out there is only a slight difference between these dual career households and the one career households in terms of how connected they were in their earlier years to Minnesota. So, for example, there's only a 3 percentage point difference between dual careers and one career in terms of whether they were raised in this area to begin with. And it turns out kind of both one career and dual career were living, had this equal propensity pretty much of living elsewhere at some point. I think one thing that we hope you take away from this talk today is that both one career and dual career really have a low interest in living elsewhere. That's even stronger for dual career, but it's really present for one career households as well. If you look at, we in the survey, we asked not only about those job scenarios, but we asked just in general, how likely or how interested are you in living elsewhere? And only 25% of respondents in one career said they were interested in living elsewhere, and that was even slightly smaller for our dual career households. One pattern that we do see if we look at who comprises these different household types, we do see for our one career household, we see a bit of a traditional gender norm pattern in that it's roughly 70% of the one career households are male, right? So it's a one career, so there's only one worker, and 70% of those are indicating that they are men. And so I think that's kind of interesting to just know that that's a little bit of a vestige. Maybe that's having to do in part because of changes over time, and we know that there's differences among age groups in the prevalence of dual career. I think one thing to just emphasize on that is when you look at the dual career side, it's about a 50-50 chance about whether the person that we're getting in the data is male or female, right? So it's really, again, indicating that these individuals are kind of in a type of household where, in this headquarter economy, they're equally likely to be male or female in these pretty big jobs. Great. And so we have a lot of kind of some quantitative data from our survey, but we also have really rich qualitative data. And so that allows us to get a little bit more into the nuance around dual careers and kind of why not only is this area attractive for professionals in general, but kind of what's the additional value that dual career couples and households are seeing here. I think what we see in the qualitative comments is really kind of something that Myles had mentioned of this, the two-body quote-unquote problem, right? That we do see this explicit consideration that households are making who are dual career about the trade-offs. I think in general, when you look at these qualitative comments, one career and two career households, it's really clear that these are very sophisticated decision makers trying to optimize over a lot of different dimensions, right? Where someone lives is a big decision, and it's very much for these individuals intertwined with where they work. And so for those dual career couples, that's adding an additional level of complexity because of the two professional careers. I think what you see, though, is that these households, particularly dual career, are really mentioning the financial stability that having those two careers is allowing them to access and afford, along with kind of a career support and career fulfillment story, even despite the fact that they know that their geographic mobility is constrained. And so I think what's really unique, like Myles says, about this area is this is a trade-off they're willing to make because there's so much opportunity in this economy to still grow their careers while remaining in this area. Great. And so if we take a step back and we look at, okay, for the kind of, what are the different pull factors that people in dual careers and one careers are thinking about for this area or making decisions to live elsewhere? I think what we do still see, despite the two-body problem that I mentioned, we do see that this area, the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, is attractive to dual career. We are seemingly able to differentially attract dual career households relative to one career. And then if you look at our survey respondents, and they were reflecting back to their most recent position, more respondents in the dual career indicated they came from a different location compared to one career, right? So we are seeing some differential attraction there. And kind of echoing what Myles had mentioned before around the geographic constraint, we do kind of see that dual career couples are continue to indicate that if the job requires a relocation, they're less interested. One career are not very interested either, mind you, but the dual career are slightly even less so. And particularly when we articulate whether that's more of a permanent move versus a temporary. All right, so let's further dig into that location decision and think about, what matters to dual career as compared to one career households. All right, so what we had our respondents do is consider a lot of different factors that would be considered maybe amenities to an area in general, right? So we had a list about 20 plus different items such as, economic vitality of an area, safe place to live, good place to raise kids, quality health care, all these different amenities. And it turns out people actually vary in their emphasis that they place on those different factors when they're considering whether to live in an area. And so we talk about these as different pull factors. And so one kind of striking, I'd say, finding is that overall, our dual career and our one career households agree on a lot of these pull factors, right? Safe place to live and work, good place to raise kids, availability for a job for myself, right? That's agreement across these two sets of respondents. However, they do vary, and not in too surprising ways, I would say. For the dual career, one of the biggest or highest rating pull factors, again, is that availability of a job for spouse and partner. And so this availability of job for spouse and partner and availability of job for me are like on par for these individuals, right? If we go to the one career households, what we see there instead is actually prioritization around a favorable cost of living. So, thinking back on those qualitative comments and what I mentioned around dual career, really finding value or a benefit of that dual career arrangement is to having that those two incomes to kind of support the lifestyle decisions they want, where they want to live, how they want to spend their time. And so on the flip side, we do see the one career households in some of their prioritizations and their comments really mentioning this cost of living as a challenge with that more of a one career income perspective. When we dig deeper into these different rankings and the emphasis we placed by these two different types of households, there are some nuance, right? So obviously, like I mentioned, the dual career versus the one career, they really differ on the importance of a career for their spouse and partner. That's not a surprise. But we also see that dual career individuals do place greater emphasis on what I would call kind of like the logistics realm of things, right? Good transportation and easy to get around, ease of travel in and out of the airport. They also place greater emphasis on friends nearby, right? So maybe they're building that support structure through friend relationships versus family. And they also place greater emphasis on having a vibrant downtown area. In contrast, when you look at the one career, where are they placing relatively more emphasis? They do have greater emphasis on a safe place to live and work in terms of the intensity of that pull factor, low taxes, and affordable cost of living, right? So those two those last two really go into that, income stream and the challenge I think that a one career household could have in an area where maybe the cost of living is geared more towards a two-income household. So we did ask our dual career couples to kind of elaborate even more around, what are not only the advantages in terms of the financial stability, but, what are some of the potential challenges, right? And so I think that's going to be really important for us to think about as we look forward for this region and whether it can be a continued place of attraction for these types of households. So what we heard loud and clear is the challenge of the childcare and parenting side of things, right? So if you have two individuals who are pursuing career and you have a family with small children, there's a lot of cost involved in terms of childcare. You're purchasing that from the marketplace, and then the logistics, right? So when you have two-career household, you might not have that extra support that a one-career household would have if they have a stay-at-home spouse or an individual who is working but maybe doesn't have those same career responsibilities. And so this logistics and household management were also things that these dual career individuals shared as an ongoing challenge. And what we also saw in the comments was what made it work, what allowed both careers to continue to thrive is having some flexibility for at least one of the partners, right? So for those two careers, it was really clear that there needed to be someone who could, step up if needed in terms of unexpected childcare events or other household needs that the couple was trying to deal with. And so I think this was really salient for us when we started the survey, filling the survey last year, and looking at different modalities and flexibility that these households had. And yeah, it was clear that not necessarily both individuals in the household needed it, but at least someone having some notion of flexibility was really important. All right, so I guess I'll hand it back over to Myles for a bit here.
So, hopefully what you've seen from the data that we've shown you and our description of our local economy is that dual career professionals are a really important part of our economy. It's one of the reasons why people stay here. It has these potentially other benefits or spillovers of if, these individuals are willing to move to startups. These can be important things. The question is, although it sets us apart, do we leverage this to actually attract people to the region? Because one of the elements that I'd argue is, one of the things that we see about the Twin Cities and the Twin Cities economy, we're really good at keeping people here once they move here, but we struggle to attract talent. So my first question is this prevalence of dual careers, both in the region, which I think many of us who live here, we understand, but this notion of exactly how prevalent it is and how does it look versus other places. My question to you is, does anyone know this? Because really our experience is when we present these data, a lot of people, especially those who live in the region, will intuitively say, oh, that makes sense to me, but I didn't really know that. And when I share this data or share this notion of dual careers are so prevalent here to people who don't live in the region, they're actually really taken aback. They're like, well, why is that the case? What could be happening there? And so, if this is an important part of our economy, and if it's an important part of talent in our economy, Colleen and I would say we should really know this. And even on top of that, if this is something that we're strong at, and it's something that, as we've argued, makes this a more desirable place than other geographies for certain couples, shouldn't this be part of what we do to promote our region? And, I'll say this as a strategy professor, right? It's always better to build from your strengths than try and build from your weaknesses. And we struggle attracting people. This is a key strength, I'd argue, of our region, this notion of how prominent dual careers are and how possible they are here. But at the same time, I don't think I've ever seen anybody sort of make that argument. I would be willing to go out on a limb showing the different data and knowing the notion of the workforce in the region and the nature of jobs. This is arguably the most attractive metro area in the country for dual professional careers, right? It's not like Houston where you both have to be chemical engineers. It's not like many other places where somebody has to have a profession that's ubiquitous, such as like in healthcare, elementary education, all sorts of dual careers we can, talk about here. I will say though, based on our work and doing some of this, and we're presenting the results and talking to people, we've seen a pickup of interest. And yeah, this is maybe something that we should do better promoting and talking about. So I've had this experience in talking, to the leaders of the big headquarters economy companies in the state. I've had policy interests, ranging from the governor, to the commissioner of deed, to different legislators. I'm thinking, yeah, we do care about talent in the region. It's important for our economy. It's important for growth. Maybe we should actually be thinking about how to best promote this. And Colleen, I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit more about this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Myles mentioned that this survey was, a follow-up to what had been done 10 years prior. And I think both surveys provided really great information on what was going on at a given point in time. What we are, our next phase of research is to try to understand kind of how these career and household location decisions are unfolding over time, right? And so on the next slide, there's going to be a QR code where you can participate directly in the research. And like Sam said, that this will also be a link in the follow-up for the webinar if the QR code's not working for you. Essentially, what we're trying to do is, we're building this Minnesota career study. So we want to study all different types of households with different career arrangements. So one career, dual career, and even those who are maybe out of the labor force now or retired, who could reflect back on some of the decisions they made in their working years. So basically, we're trying to understand the dynamics of, forward-looking and backward-looking of, where households have been and what they might be expecting or what are relevant decision factors for their future decision making. So please consider participating. It's a relatively short anonymous survey, and it would really help us advance our thinking on the dynamic nature of these professionals.
All right. All right. Thank you both so much, first of all, for sharing the information with us. I think that we are so lucky to have access to your research at this level to understand something that impacts many of us. I think I'm probably not in the exception of many of the viewers right now who are part of dual income households, two careers that are lots to juggle. So I invite the audience once more to submit any questions to the Q&A function. But while we wait for questions to come in, I'll go ahead and get us started. Could you two talk a little bit about when there are two careers at play, what are the trade-offs that couples are facing, and what does the data say about how they actually resolve that?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. I mean, I think one of my answers is we're trying to understand more about this dynamic trade-off. But from what we've collected, it's very paramount that our dual career couples are considering this job for their partner on par with their own job, right? So we see that is often, if there isn't a job opportunity for their spouse, it becomes a non-starter for a lot of individuals. And so I think, when I have presented this research to other audiences, we do hear a little bit of this turn taking. And so I think what's really interesting about these dual career couples, and Myles alluded to it as well, is not all dual career couples are the same, right? Most dual career couples are what we say equal priority couples, but there is some nuance there in which, some have one career prioritized relative to the other. And I think what that allows these couples to do is kind of ratchet up, ratchet down, and fine tune that to that opportunity, with the sense that things might change in a number of years, and maybe the other person could kind of take their turn.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that too, and what strikes me from the data is that really a large proportion of these dual career couples say that they equally weight their careers, and that's one of the things they actively manage to. And as Colleen mentions, that might change over time, and there's some priority or not. But I find, that there really is this sharing uh, of the importance for the career. And I think it's really for that reason that some of these geographic aspects of our region and why people don't want to necessarily leave and why they consider this when they're moving is because that's such an important element that, they're in this together. And that seems to be a central part of their decision making.
It's amazing to have understanding that we can have partners who have two different career tracks, but both can find upward mobility right here in the area. That feels like very core to this concept. And kind of related, we have a question from the audience from someone that said, my spouse and I are looking at relocating to be closer to aging parents. This data explains why the job search was especially difficult. What advice do you have for couples that are looking to relocate?
Relocating to this area, I think we would believe that there would be a comparative advantage for this area. So I think the key would be, well, what we do see is there's a lot of mobility in this region, talent across companies, right? And so you can talk to someone who's, let's say, currently at General Mills, but they previously were at Target, and then before that they were at Medtronic, right? So I think just leaning into not only where people are currently as from a networking skill, but where they've been before. So I think it really can open up potentially more access to this web, I would say, of job opportunities.
Yeah, I'd add to that in two ways. And I think what's really interesting about the question is, we've dived in a little bit deeper on the dual careers and how they're balancing their family, their children, and probably a little less and not as much on their parents. So I think, that highlights obviously a, key issue to many of, I'll refer to myself in the sandwich generation or sandwich phase of my career in life. So that's one thing. I think the other is, and we're seeing this in some of the work, this is potentially one of the areas where the advent of more remote work is potentially a way to deal with it. We showed a little bit of the data that, yeah, it was interesting that it's those in dual careers were much more interested in considering a fully remote option for, a job that is elsewhere than those in the one career situation. And, other work I've done, I'm a big believer in the importance of being there and serendipity that comes from being in the office and that. But again, back to the trade-offs and how to deal with it, I think that's one of the, it's a lever that we have that we didn't necessarily have a decade ago.
A great point, both about the remote option, but also the need that many people have to have a village when they're creating their families and the supports that come not just from the two people who are potentially working to raise that family too. Another question we received about the data. First of all, do you have any data that you weren't able to share today, specifically around race or other demographic information?
Yeah, so we have some of that. I don't recall seeing big differences across that, but I have to admit that that's not top of mind. So I think that that's the most straightforward answer I can give.
Yeah, no, I think we can dig into that. I think we that was one of the things that we could dig into more with this round of survey that I think maybe historically we weren't able to as much, and so we weren't doing the comparisons. It didn't lend to that comparison, but yeah, I think this is something we can indefinitely look into, just the way that we did with age and gender as well.
Awesome. We have a few more audience questions, so I'll continue to the next one. Have you considered combining factors as part of the strategy to attract dual career earners? For example, Minnesota's known for early childhood family education and healthcare. And then a follow-up to that, are you collaborating with Greater MSP and the Minnesota Business Partnerships?
So we'll start with the latter one is yes. Both, the Minnesota Business Partnership was very instrumental in helping us get access to these companies and having them be willing for us to survey their employees and that. So that's been great. Um, we are in contact with Greater MSP, some of the very early talent attraction, retention issues. I served on those task forces. So we continue that conversation with many. To the points that were raised, yes, absolutely. I think, dual careers are an important element, and there's other things too about the region that the general survey and the work shows about the importance of or the benefits of the region for families, including things like the prevalence to which people send their children to public schools and the economic impact that has. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that, Colleen, or.
Yeah, I mean, I know in terms of like early childhood education, I guess if you put that lens of dual career, then I think it's another aspect that could really supports the dual career, right? So if we have high quality childcare and that supports the ability of two partners to work, and I think it also is an incentive to even further that improvement, right? It's like a motivation to continue to invest in those types of offerings. So I think they do go hand in hand.
Let me add this too, since it's I'm thinking of it because Colleen and I will refer to this often. One of our former colleagues used to live in the Twin Cities, and she moved to Seattle. And, you know, when we talked to her, she's like, there's a striking difference just with respect to the norms and the culture with respect to dual careers. So she would go on and say, when I lived in the Twin Cities, I lived in Linden Hills, down our block. There are lots of families. Really, all the families, both spouses worked. They had kids. They're balancing these things. She was like, I moved to Seattle. It couldn't be more different. It's like every house on the street, it's like dad goes into work at the tech job and mom stays at home with the kid.
Yeah.
And, one of the things we see in the survey is I think that general sort of culture or a community that shares our values, we see that the dual career couples are reflecting that, yeah, this looks like something that they note about being in the region.
Yeah, and I think in just what is also interesting from a household perspective is not only is this area highest in the proportion of those dual income earners among those with a college degree, it's also the most equitable in terms of earnings within a household. So the two partners earning a similar amount versus kind of really a discrepancy where you kind of have a lead and a trailing, let's say, partner in terms of their career. So yeah, I think, like Myles was saying, there's aspects of the way our of the area in terms of the resources available and expectations that also help facilitate and support dual careers.
That's really interesting to think of it as actually a part of our culture here in Minnesota. I know I've certainly experienced that with my own colleagues. Many of us are in dual career households and have children, and managing that is part of work and how you're balancing all of those things. So that is really interesting insight into that. Zooming out a little bit from our individual households, I'm curious if you could speak to why employers and communities should care about the attraction and retaining of dual career couples. I know you touched on this a little
Yep.
bit, but could you expand?
Yeah, no, no, thank you. And I think the question is really well founded since we skipped over a little bit of that. And so, I describe it this way. So a lot of the work, especially on sort of the headquarter element of our economy, is really a question of talent, right? And our economy is, it's not driven by natural resources, especially in the Twin Cities. We have these very white collar jobs. It's very talent laden. And so that means growth in our region really reflects the nature of our talent base. Some of the data, both from my work and some of the data that I've participated on with the Minnesota as an advisor to the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, is there's all sorts of indications that economic growth in Minnesota, in our region, has been constrained by talent base. We would have grown faster, we would potentially have more amenities. And so, as a result, this notion of attracting talent and keeping talent is really key. And, dual careers are a nice little leverage that way.
That makes a lot of sense too. All right, we have a few more questions that have come in, and I know we have a little time, so I'm gonna just kind of go down the list here. What factors do you both see play into why specifically MSP, Minneapolis, dual career households are significantly higher than other metro areas? So why us?
Well, I think it's the jobs, right? So I think that's a primary. Like you were mentioning, Sam, it's relatively unique to have an area where both individuals can pursue their career and have multiple career opportunities and moves within the same geographic area. And I think because of, and this is what Myles kind of points out in his book, and he can expand, is we have a lot of managers, and that really, they're not just at one firm, they're at multiple firms, and that facilitates mobility within the labor market so you can continue to advance. So I think it's not an industry cluster, let's say, just for one type of industry, which would maybe constrain. It's really a cluster for managerial talent. And yeah, I'll let Myles add anything else given these insights from his book.
Yeah, no, there's two things that I'd stress that come up a little bit with what Colleen mentioned. So first is this is actually a reflection, if we take a look at the economy in our region and the state, it's actually a really diverse economy, right? So there's all sorts of different skills needed or that can be applied different ways. One of the interesting things in the book and focusing on, the white collar skills that we see in the headquarters is they're actually easily transferable across those. So if I'm a computer programmer for Target, I can be a computer programmer for 3M. Generally, that's not a problem, and things like that. So the diversity is something that's really helped with respect to that. I'd also say too that, because we are a region that has a hard time attracting people here, our employers are actually really open to taking people. Well, you haven't worked in our industry for 10 years. Well, that doesn't matter. We've seen this work before. That's better than not having anyone. So I think it's, as Colleen really mentions, it's the nature of the jobs, but, it's also one of the things that, Sam, that you reflected on, that because it is so prevalent, there is this infrastructure to support it. And so as our audience members have noticed, there is early childhood education. You're not looked at funny if you take your kids to the restaurant and stuff like that. That sort of cultural aspect help fuels that.
That makes a lot of sense. So not just the upward mobility within your own sector career path, but actually the ability to change sectors is a key piece of why us, basically. That's awesome to hear too. We have another really good question that came in. Speaking to something Colleen presented on, the data showed the senior leaders primarily in those one career households. The question is, does the perspective of those leaders negatively inform their expectations of lower level dual career employees and how they manage them?
Yeah, great question. I think, when we were asking this survey, it only had those three options, really. We didn't have a lot of granularity in terms of all these different levels in the hierarchy. And so, like I mentioned, this complementary data that I have, dual careers were very, very much prevalent, including equal weighted dual careers, right? Which Myles has made reference to, all the way until the very, very top. And at that point, there are very few individuals, and there is kind of equal representation between one career and what I would call a dual career lead. So they are in dual career, but they have the kind of lead role. I think that's a really interesting question because I do see this kind of cliff between the representation of dual career egalitarian to, let's say, one career or dual career lead. And I think that's a puzzle that I want to unpack more, is what's creating that. Is it that the dual career egalitarians don't get to that level, or do they transition as a household to a different format, right? Do they become one career? Do they become dual career lead? So I think that's the jury's still out, I think, on kind of what that dynamic is. In general, I think it's more of an asset, because even a dual career egalitarian or equal priority, both individuals are ready and poised potentially to take a career advancing move. So you do kind of maybe double your odds in some ways of getting that next opportunity. So I think it's a really good question that the person has, and I think it's something I'm interested in learning more.
And I'll give a little, and there's a nuance too in the data is, right, that was showing the percentage of the single career households. And remember, in the data, the dual career households are 4 times as more prevalent as the other one. So even though the percentage is high, there's a lot of even in the sample, dual career individuals in the senior leadership position. I think it's an interesting question. But I will reflect also on some of my discussions with some of the very senior leaders in these companies in the last 3 to 4 months, and showing the data, uniformly, they're like, wow, this is what the data says. We have to really care about this, has been the response. Now, whether that follows through or we can think of counterexamples, but I think, I think we find it comforting that the data seems to speak to people.
Yeah, and I think if we want to think about, talent management implications, I think given this area, and actually both one career and two career households being not super keen on relocation, I think, that practice of really looking at that practice to say how important is relocation in our firm in order to get to that next level. I think it's important for organizations to at least ask that question and investigate whether that's needed, as well as understand there could be differential impact across employees.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's great to hear that people are listening to the data, and that our people listening today have a chance to be in the data if they participate in the research. So very cool way to feel like you can touch and have an impact on how people are thinking about this. We'll close with one more question that was asked. You've mentioned several really large, huge companies. The question is, how do you think the research applies to mid-size or smaller companies?
Yeah, so we're focusing our discussion on large companies because that's largely who has answered the survey. I'll reiterate Colleen's invitation to participate. Nevertheless, drawing away from the survey data and sort of both talking to the individuals, as I mentioned, one of the things that we do see, and I've talked to lots of individuals, is one of the spouses will have the big headquarters job, and somebody will be willing to go in a startup or a smaller company. And so I think it's an important element. The data we have can't speak as directly to it right now.
Fair enough. You only have the data that you have, so it makes sense to be trying to collect more. And it's awesome to see there's so many questions that are being spurred based on what you've presented. I love when that happens, when you walk away from a conversation with more questions than when you came in. So we'll kind of go to our closing now. I want to just say thank you again to both Myles and Colleen for their time today and in their time preparing for this session. We have a couple of additional upcoming webinars. The next one is particularly of interest to this group. We'll be diving into Minnesota's demographics with our state demographer, Susan Brower, on Thursday the 26th next week. The following week, we'll hear about updated policy around cannabis in Minnesota on March 4th. We want to also just do a quick thank you. Membership powers everything we do, so thank you especially to our Alumni Association members. And I wish you all a great, wonderful day ahead. Thank you for your attention today.